The first rule of home renovation is to expect the unexpected. I just didn't expect the unexpected to be a room that was on the blueprints from 1958, but not in the house I was standing in. It wasn't just a case of a wall being knocked down or a layout being changed over the decades. According to the measurements, 80 square feet of my house had just vanished. My name is David, and 6 months ago, I did the one thing everyone my age dreams of and dreads in equal measure. I bought a house. It wasn't much, just a tired-looking bungalow on the leafy, forgotten side of town, but it was mine. A 1950s relic with good bones, peeling paint, and a price tag that made my bank account weep but not completely hemorrhage. I'm a DIY guy by nature. My dad taught me how to hang drywall before I could properly ride a bike. For me, a fixer-upper wasn't a warning, it was an invitation. The first few weeks were a honeymoon period of sledgehammers and take-out pizza eaten on a dusty floor. I tore out the shag carpeting that smelled of old cigarettes and shattered the avocado green tile in the bathroom. This was my canvas. My masterpiece in the making. The real planning started when I found the original blueprints rolled up in a cardboard tube in the attic, tucked away behind some brittle insulation. They were beautiful, crisp, blue and white documents, smelling of old paper and ambition. The architect's name, Alastair Finch, was written in an elegant, spidery script in the corner. I spread them out on the living room floor, a mug of coffee leaving a ring on the corner, and started mapping out my grand vision. That's when I saw it. Sandwiched between the master bedroom and the hall closet, there was a small, unassuming rectangle. It was labeled simply storage. No windows. A single door opening into the main hallway. Dimensions 8 feet by 10 feet. 80 square feet. Not huge, but not insignificant either. It was the perfect spot for a small home office. I walked over to the spot in the hallway where the door should have been. There was nothing. Just a long, seamless stretch of plaster wall. I knocked on it. A dull, solid thud. No hollow sound. No hint of a hidden doorway. I frowned, pulling out my tape measure. The wall that separated the hall closet from the master bedroom was thick, sure, but not 8 feet thick. It didn't make sense. My first thought was simple. A previous owner had removed the room, expanding the closet and the bedroom and plastering over the hallway entrance. It was a common enough renovation. But when I measured the master bedroom and the closet, they matched the blueprint's dimensions perfectly. Neither had been expanded. The space was just gone. The math didn't add up. The house was smaller on the inside than it was supposed to be. I went outside, my boots crunching on the overgrown lawn. I measured the exterior foundation wall, from the corner of the master bedroom to the edge of the front door. Then I went back inside and measured the interior space covering the same stretch: the bedroom, the closet, the hallway wall. I did the math once, twice, 3 times. The interior was 8 feet shorter. An entire room's worth of space existed on the outside of my house that did not exist on the inside. This was the point where pragmatic, sensible David should have shrugged, assumed there was a bizarre architectural quirk, and moved on. Maybe there was a massive structural column in there, or old chimney works that had been walled off. But I couldn't shake a creeping sense of unease. It felt like a typo in the fabric of reality. That night, my obsession began. I bought a high-end stud finder, one that could detect electrical wiring and deep-seated pipes. In the hallway, over the spot where the phantom room's door should be, the device was silent. It registered the occasional wooden stud, consistent with the rest of the wall. But as I slid it over the dead center of the missing space, it went completely haywire. It didn't just beep. It shrieked, all its lights flashing erratically, the signal strength meter redlining. I pulled it away and it went quiet. I put it back and the screeching started again. It wasn't detecting wood or metal or wiring. It was detecting something else. Or maybe just nothing, so profoundly that it broke the machine's logic. That was the first night I had trouble sleeping in my new home. The house felt different. It felt like it was watching me. The days that followed were consumed by the anomaly. My renovation plans were forgotten, the half-finished bathroom gathering dust. My life was now about that single, stubborn wall. I became a detective in my own home, and the house itself was my only suspect. I started talking to myself, muttering measurements and theories as I paced the hallways. 80 square feet don't just disappear, I'd whisper to the empty rooms. The silence that answered felt less like emptiness and more like a held breath. My friend Mike called, asking if I needed a hand with the wiring. "Nar, I'm good," I lied, the shrieking stud finder sitting on the counter next to me. "Just tracing some old plans." Bit of a puzzle. I couldn't tell him the truth. How could I say I was pretty sure my house was gaslighting me? He'd think I'd been breathing in too much lead paint dust. The isolation was a tangible thing, a silence that amplified every creak and groan of the old house. My next logical step was escalation. If I couldn't see what was in the wall, I'd have to look. I bought a cheap endoscope camera online, a little snake of a thing with a tiny LED light that connected to my phone. My plan was simple: drill a small, easily patched hole and take a peek. It felt like a violation, a surgical procedure on my own home. The first attempt was a bust before it even began. I marked the spot with a pencil, a perfect bullseye. I fitted a half-inch bit into my drill, took a deep breath, and squeezed the trigger. The moment the bit touched the plaster, every light in the house went out. I was plunged into a sudden, shocking darkness. My heart hammered against my ribs. I fumbled for my phone, its flashlight cutting a nervous beam through the gloom. The main breaker had tripped. Just a coincidence, I told myself. Old house, sensitive wiring. I reset it, but the mood was broken. I packed up my tools for the night, a new prickling paranoia crawling up my spine. A few days later, I was ready to try again. I'd checked the wiring, I'd eaten a good breakfast, and I was feeling rational again. It was just a house. I placed the drill bit against the same pencil mark. This time, I didn't even get to pull the trigger. A sound from the basement, a loud whoosh followed by the unmistakable hiss of spraying water, sent a jolt of pure dread through me. I ran downstairs to find a torrent of rusty water gushing from a burst pipe, flooding the concrete floor. It was a nightmare. It took me the better part of a week and a significant chunk of my remaining budget to fix it. Another coincidence, I reasoned. An old, corroded pipe that chose that exact moment to give up the ghost. But the house seemed to be throwing problems at me, expensive, time-consuming problems, like a cornered animal deploying its defenses. Once the basement was dry, the obsession returned with a vengeance. This time, I didn't hesitate. I walked straight to the wall, drilled the hole, and felt a satisfying crunch as the bit pushed through the plaster and lath. I was in. My hands were shaking as I threaded the endoscope camera into the hole. I switched on my phone screen, expecting to see a dark, dusty void. Instead, I saw a wall of solid, red brick. I pushed the camera further. It didn't budge. I pulled it back and pushed it again at a different angle. More brick. It was like drilling into a chimney, except there was no chimney in this part of the house. The blueprints were clear. This was supposed to be a room. Defeated, I pulled the camera out. My mind was reeling. A bricked-up room? Why would anyone do that? And why wouldn't it show on the outside? I sat on the floor, staring at the small, dark hole, a tiny wound in the pristine wall. I must have been there for an hour, just thinking, trying to make the pieces fit in a way that didn't make me sound like a lunatic. Finally, I stood up, my knees cracking in protest. I ran my hand over the wall, my fingers searching for the hole I had just drilled, and I found nothing. My breath caught in my throat. I knelt again, my eyes inches from the plaster. The pencil mark was gone. The drill hole, with its ragged edges of plastered dust, was gone. The wall was perfectly smooth, seamless, and coated with the same thin layer of aged dust as the rest of the hallway. It was as if it had never happened. I looked at my drill, the bit still covered in plastered dust. I looked at my phone, the saved video of a brick wall staring back at me. I had proof, but the crime scene had vanished. The house hadn't just defended itself. It had healed itself. And that's when I knew I wasn't dealing with an architectural quirk. I was dealing with something impossible. Sanity is a funny thing. You don't realize how much you rely on the basic rules of the world. Walls stay where you leave them. Holes don't just vanish until one of them breaks. After the disappearing drill hole incident, my relationship with the house changed. The obsession curdled into a kind of low-grade, simmering terror. I was no longer a homeowner. I was an inmate, sharing my cell with something I couldn't see or understand. I started documenting everything. I bought a new notebook and began a log, recording the date, time, and any strange occurrences. I took pictures of walls and doorways from the exact same spot every morning and every night, comparing them for minute changes. I carried a tape measure with me everywhere, constantly remeasuring hallways, doorways, rooms. The numbers were never stable. A hallway might be an inch shorter in the evening than it was in the morning. A door frame would be a quarter-inch narrower. The changes were so small, so subtle, that I felt like I was losing my mind. Was it the tape measure? Was it the humidity affecting the wood? Or was the house subtly, constantly shifting its own geometry to keep me confused, to keep me away from its secret? The passive resistance began to turn into something more active. I'd leave a hammer on the kitchen counter and find it in the bathroom sink. My car keys, which I always left in a bowl by the door, would turn up inside the refrigerator. It was classic ghost activity, the kind of thing you see in movies, but it felt deeply personal. It wasn't just random poltergeist mischief, it felt targeted, designed to make me question my own memory. Then came the noises. At first, it was just the usual groans of an old house settling. But soon, a new sound joined the nightly chorus. It was a low, dragging scrape. A heavy, rhythmic sound, like a block of concrete being slowly pushed across a stone floor. And it was coming from inside the wall, from the phantom room. Some nights it was faint, barely audible over the hum of the fridge. Other nights it was loud enough to wake me from a dead sleep, my heart pounding in the oppressive silence that followed each scrape. Something was in there, and it was moving. I was at my lowest point. I was barely sleeping, living on coffee and adrenaline. I looked like a wreck. I'd lost weight. My conversations with Mike became stilted and evasive. I knew I should leave. Just pack a bag, walk away, and let the bank deal with this malevolent pile of lumber and plaster. But I couldn't. My entire life savings, my future, was tied up in this house. And more than that, a stubborn, angry part of me refused to be driven out. It was my house. I wouldn't let it win. If the house was a puzzle, I needed the instructions. I went back to the blueprints. I spent an entire weekend poring over them with a magnifying glass, searching for any detail I might have missed. And I found it. In the corner of the box labeled storage, there was a tiny, faded annotation in the same spidery script as the architect's signature. It wasn't a word, but a symbol, a small, intricate sigil, like something from an old alchemy text. Below it, a single, barely legible word, Acavio. My high school Latin was rusty, but I knew that one. It meant beware. This was my key. I fired up my laptop and went down a rabbit hole of local history, searching for anything on Alastair Finch. For hours, I found nothing but building permits and business listings. But then I stumbled upon a digitized university archive, a collection of local folklore and occultism. There he was. Alastair Finch wasn't just an architect, he was a prominent member of a local esoteric society in the 1940s and 50s. They were obsessed with fringe theories, spatial dynamics, architectural magic, the idea that the physical layout of a building could influence the metaphysical world. I found a transcript of a lecture Finch gave in 1956, 2 years before my house was built. He spoke of non-Euclidean architecture and the concept of creating pockets in reality, spaces designed not to be entered, but to contain. They were prisons. He called them anchor rooms or static chambers, designed to trap and hold entities that were hostile to our own reality. He believed certain dimensions and materials could create a cage that was inescapable, not through physical strength, but through metaphysical law. The room wasn't meant to keep people out. It was built to keep something in. Everything clicked into place with a horrifying, sickening clarity. The house wasn't being hostile, it was being defensive. The shifting walls, the burst pipes, the flickering lights, they weren't attacks on me. They were warnings. They were the desperate, failing attempts of a dying organism to protect its own structural integrity. My drilling, my hammering, my obsession with breaking in. I hadn't been trying to solve a mystery. I had been weakening the bars of a cage. The scraping sound I'd been hearing for weeks suddenly made a terrible new kind of sense. It wasn't just something moving. It was something testing the walls. Something looking for a way out. A sudden, sharp crack echoed from the hallway. I shot out of my chair, my heart seizing in my chest. I crept out of the living room and looked down the hall at the wall. My wall, a thin, black crack, no thicker than a spider's thread, had appeared in the plaster, right where my drill had once been. It snaked upwards towards the ceiling, a jagged wound in the skin of my house. And from this tiny fissure, a draft of impossibly cold air flowed out, carrying with it a smell of ancient dust, of damp earth, and something else. Something foul, like meat left to rot in a deep, dark cellar. The scraping from inside the wall stopped. It was replaced by a new sound, a faint, eager scratching, right on the other side of the plaster. The silence that followed the scratching was worse than the noise itself. It was a predatory silence, full of weight and anticipation. I stood frozen in the hallway, the cold from the crack seeping into my bones, every rational thought in my head screaming at me to run. Get out. Leave the keys, the mortgage, the whole cursed mess behind and never look back. But I couldn't move. I saw the faces of the families living next door, the kids who played on the sidewalk. I had knocked on the door of this prison, and whatever was inside was about to get out. This was my fault. That's when the house began to scream. It wasn't a sound, but a feeling, a violent, shuddering groan that ran through the floorboards and up my legs. The single light bulb in the hallway flickered wildly, casting the corridor in a strobe of light and shadow. In those flashing moments, I could see the crack in the wall widening, tiny grains of plaster falling to the floor. The scratching from within grew frantic, desperate. It was being joined by a new sound, a dull, heavy thump thump thump. The thing inside was throwing itself against the wall. My choice was made. I couldn't run. I was a fixer, a builder. I had broken this, and I had to be the one to seal it again. Alastair Finch had built a cage, and I had to reinforce it. My mind raced, trying to piece together Finch's esoteric theories from the scattered lecture notes I'd read. It was about structure, about layers, about intention. I couldn't just patch the plaster. I had to entomb it. I had to build a wall on top of the wall. Action finally broke my paralysis. I sprinted to the garage, my mind a frantic checklist of materials. Plywood, 2x4s, bags of quick-set concrete I'd bought for the front steps, screws, nails, my heaviest hammer. I dragged everything into the hallway, my breath coming in ragged, panicked gasps. The thumping from inside the wall was louder now, shaking the entire structure. The air grew colder, and the rotten smell was so thick I had to breathe through my mouth. The next few hours were a blur of primal, desperate labor. I was no longer a renovator. I was a soldier fortifying a breach. I measured and sawed the 2x4s with shaking hands, building a crude frame directly against the cracked plaster. Each time my drill whined, the thumping from inside would intensify, as if the sound was agitating it, enraging it. A picture frame fell off the living room wall and shattered. The kitchen faucet turned on by itself, blasting cold water into the sink. The house was in its death throes, its defensive systems failing. I mixed the concrete on a tarp in the hallway, a sloppy gray soup. I screwed the first sheet of thick plywood to the bottom of the frame and started shoveling the wet concrete into the gap between the new wood and the old plaster. It was heavy, messy work. The thumping grew thunderous, the force of it making the whole wall vibrate against my hands. I could feel the impacts, a series of concussive blows that seemed to be aimed right at me. I kept shoveling, my muscles burning, my mind narrowed to a single, repetitive thought: bury it, bury it, bury it. As I nailed the final piece of plywood into place, sealing the last gap, a final, deafening bang erupted from within the wall, so powerful it knocked me backward onto the floor. And then silence. The vibrating stopped. The cold draft vanished. The foul smell dissipated, leaving only the clean scent of cut wood and wet cement. The house was still, utterly, profoundly still. I lay on the floor for a long time, my heart beating a frantic rhythm against the quiet. I had done it. I had reinforced the cage. I never spent another night in that house. I packed a single bag that evening and left, leaving all my tools, my furniture, my half-finished projects behind. The house felt neutral again, but I knew what lay sleeping behind my ugly, concrete-filled wall in the hallway. I couldn't live there, and I couldn't sell it. How could I sign a disclosure form? Property contains one architecturally concealed metaphysical prison. Condition of inmate unknown. Good luck. I defaulted on the mortgage. The bank took the house. It was a financial catastrophe, but it was better than the alternative. Sometimes, late at night, I'd drive through my old neighborhood. A few weeks ago, I saw a new sign on the lawn. Sold. I pulled over across the street, my hands gripping the steering wheel. I saw a young couple get out of their car. They looked just like I had a year ago, excited, optimistic, pointing at the windows, dreaming of the life they would build inside. He was holding a tape measure. She was carrying a binder full of paint swatches. They were walking towards the front door, keys in hand, laughing. I should have gotten out of the car. I should have run across the street and warned them, told them some lie about bad foundations or toxic mold, anything to make them turn around. But what could I say that wouldn't make me sound insane? So I just sat there, hidden in the dark of my car, and watched them unlock the door and step inside. I watched the lights flicker on, one by one. And then I just drove away. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe and give this video a like. We appreciate everyone and can't wait to bring more stories your way.